On the other hand, if you're in a sector that's got some inherent risks to it, or you have a high chance of being sued, then the creation of a legal entity that's separate to, as I described a second ago, becomes more and more relevant.
Kia ora team, Richard Liew here, editor at nzentrepreneur.co.nz, and today on the Knowledge Base, I'm joined by Rob Rolls. Rob is the founder and CE at the moment of a very interesting company called Afirmo.
Looking forward to having a chat with you, Richard.
People who haven't heard of Afirmo, what is it you guys are doing, and who you're working with? I guess what are some of the pain points you're helping people solve?
Essentially, we've set up a business which has got a business setup tool and a business scale-up tool, as we're referring to it. So the setup tool covers everything you can imagine that's needed to set up a business. So all the things you'd imagine, so business registrations, tax registrations, but also bundle in a whole heap of other products ranging from insurance to domain names, to logo builders, to websites, and all the foundational elements around sales invoices and expense claims, etc. So we've got the business setup tool, and then we've got the scale-up tool where we focus on importing bank transaction data, and also the data I was referring to from sales invoices and expense claims to calculate small businesses, GST and income tax liabilities. So pretty innovative product set, end to end. So we get people set up and it literally just takes an hour. So they can come in and set up a sole trader or a partnership or a limited liability company here in New Zealand.
And you mentioned there are a few different structures, such as sole trader, partnership, limited liability company. Now, for people who may be starting a business for the very first time, they've got the idea and they can't wait to get stuck in and finding customers and hopefully making money. But choosing that structure initially can sometimes be a bit of a dilemma. It's pretty easy to start a business here in New Zealand, more so than most other places in the world, in fact. But can you explain briefly what the most sort of popular types of business structure are, and how would a founder know which one's going to be right for them?
The primary structures cover a sole trader business, a partnership, and a limited liability company. So I guess the first step is to understand whether you've got one or more people that are going to own the entity. So clearly, if you've got more than one person owning the entity, then you can't be a sole trader, versus if it's one, obviously it can be a sole trader. If I sort of looked at the difference between a sole trader and a company, just to sort of explain the point. So a company in itself is a separate legal entity to you. So, you're sitting here as Robert Rolls, and here you're sitting here as Afirmo New Zealand Limited. So the law recognised you as different and separate to the company. So by having this degree of separation and having this different legal entity, it means that you have limited liability because it's not you as an individual. But allied to that, the fact that it's a separate entity has a different set of challenges to it, i.e. you've got to get the money out of the company when it makes a profit and back to you as the individual. So there's many ways of taking money out, ranging from dividends to shareholder salaries, or you can put yourself on the payroll or lend yourself money, etc. And they've all got different tax rules associated with them. Sole traders is the simplest because it's just you as an individual, but obviously you don't have that limited liability I was referring to. And fundamentally, for a sole trader and a partnership, you take all the income from the business and allocate it to the individual's partners in the partnership case, and basically tax it as part of your individual tax return. Versus the company would have, the company's got to prepare a tax return, and then potentially the shareholder and director have to prepare their own tax returns. And it's sort of the reason why we set Afirmo up, really, just to make these things that on the face of it sound really complicated to something that we can basically do all online seamlessly and keep track of those things. So it's a big driver for why we set Afirmo up in the first place.
And what a lot of people don't realize, I think, maybe when they're first getting into business, is that essentially, if you want to start trading, it's pretty straightforward. You can pretty much just start doing that off the bat as a sole trader. But you mentioned there's something called limited liability, which is a key distinction between having a company versus being a sole trader.
Yep.
Can you just explain a bit more about why that might be something founders want to consider? Like, what are the benefits?
Yeah, so as part of our, if you came into the Afirmo app, for example, and then you wanted to set up a business, we take you through a series of questions. And it's centered around risk. It's centered around your appetite for risk, basically. So if you're taking on a profession, let's say you're going up to work for a single employer, in effect, I know it's not an employer because you're a sole trader, but one entity, you're not basically taking massive risk as part of that job, maybe just giving your time away for professional services, then maybe sole traders are right for you. On the other hand, if you're in a sector that's got some inherent risks to it, or you have a high chance of being sued, then the creation of a legal entity that's separate to you, as I described a second ago, becomes more and more relevant.
So something to obviously take into account, as you point out, there's risk and having to think about whether or not it's going to be appropriate to look for that separation of the business as a legal entity from yourself as a person.
And there's a number of other considerations. For example, if you intend to sell the business in the future, it's hard to sell yourself as a sole trader. So you can obviously sell a company just by changing the shareholders of the company. And that's obviously the main attributes of a company. You've got directors, so people that run the business, and shareholders, people that own the business. So part of our question there in terms of selecting the right business structure for the entrepreneur coming into business is around, as I say, risk, but also intentions for the future in terms of selling the entity or not.
Now, there's a little bit more complexity that goes into starting as a company. For example, every company needs a director. Yep. And either a constitution, which is sort of like the rules of your company, and or a shareholder agreement if you've got shareholders. So when it comes to shareholding agreements, what should people be expecting in terms of what do they need to know about when they need one? When do they need legal advice? What are some other options for getting that in place?
So you're right. So basically you have the Companies Act, which basically says, regardless of what you've signed up to, regardless of what documents you may have as a company, this is going to apply to you, because obviously it's the law. And then you can elect to have a constitution, and you can elect to have a company shareholders agreement, but you don't have to. So basically you sort of got the three tiers, if you like. As you say, you've got the law, you've got the thing that sticks with the company, the constitution, and then you've got the rules for the shareholders. What we say to our customers is, if you have one shareholder, then basically you're probably not going to fall out with yourself. So therefore the rules between shareholders are not that relevant. Not saying it's not a good idea to have a shareholders agreement. But clearly if you've got more than one shareholder, then there's a propensity, or it could be a propensity for some sort of fallout, or some sort of set of rules that are needed around if one party wants to reduce their shareholding, they've got to make the shares available to the other party, etc. So the shareholders agreement really deals with a set of rules around, conflict resolution or issuing more shares and capital structure type changes.
Now, in amongst the choosing of legal structure and doing all the registration and that kind of stuff, which clearly you've come up with some smart ways of helping people save time and effort and money and to do that. That's great. But there's almost like a laundry list of a whole bunch of other stuff that business owners typically need to think about. Can you cover off some of those? Like, because when we start a business for the first time, it can sort of seem overwhelming. Like, what do I do first? What do I do second? What's not actually so important? You got any advice, high level?
Yeah, very, very much. And I guess that's part of, as I described earlier, we have a checklist. So when you come in and start a business, that regardless of structure within our Afirmo app, then basically we take you through a checklist. Do you have these things? There's 22 points on there at the moment. And then depending on whether you have them or not, then we basically create extra cards, and you've got to work the way through the cards after you've learned more or used the tools within the app. I'll probably describe it as sort of the stuff you have to do, i.e. the structural things that we referred to a minute ago around the tax registrations or registering as an employer or getting an NZ business number, all those good things. And then there are other things that come dependent on what you're trying to do as a business. The way I would always set it up personally would be to have a forecast. So the notion of a business plan, a strategy document, and then basically run a series of, a budget model attached to that. And the budget model basically just quantifies everything you're saying in your plan. So in my first year of business, I'm intending to do these things, and this is the budget implication. Why is that important? It's important because you'll know what your funding needs for setting up the business. So if you take on staff, or you may or may not make a loss in the early years, which is obviously not uncommon for a small business setting up, it's good to quantify that so you get your funding sources lined up in advance. And then we take through a whole bunch of other things around sort of building a brand identity, getting trademark protection, getting insurances in place, etc. So it's a pretty, as I say, 22 points on our list at this stage, growing based on customer feedback. But yeah.
So, right, if you're watching this and you're thinking, right, there's 22 points I need to note down or whatever, maybe, yeah, well worth going and checking out the Afirmo offering there. Can we talk now quickly about a bit about your, I guess, startup story as a business as well? What was, I guess, the moment where you or your co-founders said, right, here's the vision and here's what we're going to do, and let's get on with it?
I think there's a couple of points. So I've been thinking about Afirmo as a concept for many, many years. I came over to New Zealand from the UK, having a background in accounting, then in banking. Then I bought into a tech business that we used to basically roll up the web hosting and domain sector. So we had the largest domain registrar in the country before we sold that to American interest in November 2020. And for me, it was a deeply satisfying period, but also a deeply frustrating period in terms of product innovation. In terms of, if we had a longer runway and more time, then we would have innovated into more areas. And basically the things that we would have innovated into is how Afermo, to my mind, grew. So, in terms of solving problems for small businesses, they want more than domains, they want more than websites, they want more than hosting. And we've been able to take that gap, if you like, in the product set and bring it over. My co-founders, I should say, come from marketing backgrounds and tech backgrounds, so got a pretty good team in place. I think during COVID, during lockdown, a lot of people sort of reached for the how do I sort of start doing side hustles, or how can I do something to basically not be so bored during the lockdown that went on for months in Auckland. So I think myself and my partner at that point looked at how easy it was to set up a business, and she was certainly quite surprised by how difficult it was, and that gave us impetus to really get into it and start planning around what we were going to do in terms of creating a firm after we sold the last business.
And how's it gone so far? You've been in market since April?
Yeah, so we launched a tax product in April to coincide with the beginning of the tax year. We've got 3,500 customers at this stage, so doing well. I think it's hard to get a brand out in market. It sounds easy, and we're spending certainly enough money on marketing and digital marketing to get our name out there. But I'd say that was the hardest bit for me. And then I'm also heavily involved in the product design, so I sort of have this stay in the office and do product stuff versus go out of the office and meet small business networks, etc. So I'm sort of on the verge of changing my focus from basically being desk bound to far more out there and basically doing a better job as a CEO in terms of getting our name out in the market. So yeah, we're really happy where we are. We're solving real problems, and you hear customer feedback that really talks about how we've solved many problems and got people in the business. It's pretty gratifying.
Thanks so much for your insights today, and wishing you guys all the best. That was Rob Rolls. He's a Chief Executive and founder at Afermo. Go check him out.
Thank you very much, Richard.